The Colts just got their best offensive player back, and they might get their best defender back too. And oh yeah, a win could put the Colts on top of the AFC South. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and use code all lowercase LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. What up, y'all? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of horseshoehuddle.com. I'm your resident media member for the site, and Zach is your resident film expert for the site. And today we are giving our official and final preview of Colts and Texans. This is a big one. Colts 4-3, Texans 5-2. So far, mixed results for the both sides. Really, the Colts are kind of pointing up. The Texans are sputtering a little bit. Obviously, the Texans did get the better of the Colts in week one. But if the Colts win this one on Sunday, these teams will both be on top of the AFC South. Now, the Texans will have the slight edge because they've got a better divisional record. But still, the Colts could pull themselves even, which seemed unlikely after the start they got off to this season. But the best news for the Colts, Jonathan Taylor has been out the last 3 games, and he's been removed from the injury report. He is back, their best, most explosive offensive player, and defensive tackle DeForest Buckner. He returned to practice this week. He currently is listed as questionable, but I think Zach and I both feel pretty good about this. So we'll explain that further in the defensive section of this thing. But man, Zach, what are you thinking? So we could start with the offense. Luckily for the Colts, they have Anthony Richardson in this one. They have Jonathan Taylor in this one. They got the receivers. Like they're kind of full go, as full go as they have been at any point in the season, other than, of course, the first week or two.
Yeah, it's as healthy as you can really expect for a Colts team at the halfway point of the season in terms of all their wide receivers are playing, they're starting running backs playing, they're starting quarterbacks playing, 4 out of their 5 offensive linemen are playing. Like, when have the Colts ever been this healthy? Knock on wood, obviously, when I say something like that, because you never know with this team. But so yeah, it's a great thing to see, and it's exactly where you want to be going into this type of matchup. Like you mentioned at the top of the show, this is for the division lead at week 8 of the season. Like, this is essentially the halfway point of the season, and the Colts are, if they win this game, they're tied for the division lead with a team that everyone was expecting to be the Super Bowl contender and top tier football team in the league. And like you mentioned, the Houston Texans are sputtering a little bit. I don't think it's like this massive sputter. I mean, their brutal game they had this past week was a 2-point loss to the Green Bay Packers or whatever it was. Like,
the Packers really defense is good. They're showing everybody. Like, right. That Colts game was bad, but the Packers defense is pretty good.
Right. So even the Texans at their worst are still a pretty good football team. But yeah, this is a great opportunity for the Colts, and especially for the Colts offense. I think when you look at the year that Anthony Richardson has had, aside from that start against the Pittsburgh Steelers, I mean, his last 3 games have just not been good football games from him. You could even say this past one that we saw against Miami was his best one in over a month. And it was not a great start from him. I mean, he did some good things on the ground, but his throwing was not great in this past game. And you're going to need a lot more of that, a lot more of what he did in week 1 against Houston, or what he did last year, I guess, in any of those rookie starts, if you're going to beat a team like Houston. Because, again, this is a different tier of football team than the Miami Dolphins. Luckily, the Houston Texans are a little bit banged up on defense. And I think one of the biggest aspects that slows down this Colts offense is a linebacker that can cover and a linebacker that has that next level awareness to read things behind him. And with the Texans being down Azeez Al-Shaair in this one, I do think that's a pretty big absence there for the Texans. They have good linebackers behind him who played really well against Jordan Love last week, but it's a different animal, honestly, than not having Azeez Al-Shaair. We saw last week Jordan Brooks disrupted a lot of the Colts over the middle throws. We saw again in week 1, a lot of the Colts underneath stuff was getting disrupted by Al-Shaair. So maybe with backup linebackers in there, Richardson can find a groove over the middle of the field. But at the end of the day, I think this is a great opportunity for the Colts offense. You get Richardson out there with Jonathan Taylor. You can lean on the ground game a little bit and maybe, just maybe, take advantage of some backup linebackers over the middle of the field. I think this is a day where, like, look, if the offense is going to click at any time under Anthony Richardson, it kind of needs to be this week because it doesn't get easier going forward. And this is one that has big, big implications for the playoffs and potentially for the division the rest of the season.
Yeah, no, this feels much different than week one. The trajectory of both teams are different right now, but also the health. The Colts are getting really good news, whereas Houston, Nico Collins is on IR now. He's not going to be in this one. You mentioned Aziz Al-Shair, but also Henry To'o is in the concussion protocol, and he's questionable. That's a starter. Jimmy Ward, starting safety, he's out. So
Alec Pierce is so sad about that one, right. I bet.
Yeah. Both tackles, they're going to play, but Tunsil and Titus Howard, I can't recall if Howard is still starting or not, but they've been banged up throughout the week. So this is, a much different feel. I think the Colts, I think they should be, we're going to talk about the point spread in a bit, but I think the Colts almost should be favored in this one. Like it's looking up. But you mentioned Anthony Richardson and kind of ironing things out. So I feel like we kind of follow a pattern with him a little bit. Obviously injuries are nothing new for him, but he comes back from an injury or, starts the season, whatever. It's pretty clunky and a little messy initially, but after a couple games, 2-3 games, it really starts to click. And then unfortunately, usually another injury comes about. We're not going to talk about that in this one, but he's on schedule to have one of those bounce back games like it looked like he was on pace for against Pittsburgh. So I'm optimistic about this one for the Colts offense in particular. Obviously, you never want to face CJ Stroud defensively, so that might be a little bit of a different animal, but I feel good about this one going in. Anthony Richardson with another week back from his injury. Jonathan Taylor's officially back. And that run game outside of Anthony Richardson was not great. They averaged 3.7 yards per carry, the running backs did. So, again, the receivers are back. We know what Alec Pierce was able to do in week one. Now Houston's going to have a plan for that this time around, but, we'll see. Blown coverages can happen. So I feel good.
Yeah, I think this is a good week for the Colts to figure out their identity on offense too. Like, do we want to be a team that leans on the ground game to set up these explosives that we've been constantly calling? I mean, you guys who listen to the show can recall earlier in the week, me and Ben Boris were saying, like, look, the problem with this offense right now is they're kind of just spamming vertical shots, which is fine. Like, if you want to sacrifice some of the efficiency to be explosive, that's perfectly fine, but you have to have some modicum of efficiency in this offense, whether that's running the ball through Jonathan Taylor, running the ball through Anthony Richardson, or having the layup game in the passing game. Like, you have to have some kind of underneath efficiency to set up the explosion. And the Colts really haven't had that in the last couple Anthony Richardson starts. You can even say they haven't had that once this year in an Anthony Richardson start. Even going back to week one against Houston, they were kind of just relying on the deep ball, and that's kind of how they stayed alive in that game and nearly pulled off the upset in week one. So this is a good week to find your identity. Are you going to be a run-heavy team that sets up the explosion that way, or are you going to be a team that can, use the passing game, use the underneath passing game like a Kansas City or a Baltimore and have these layups built in to get the ball out of your quarterback's hands? I think it's a good week to figure that stuff out. And again, at the end of the day, we know the explosive plays are here against this Houston Texans defense. These corners like to jump out routes. They like to be aggressive on underneath throws. And we saw a couple times in week one. I mean, they hit 3 or 4 explosives in that game. They could have hit like 7 or 8 explosives in that game with more accurate balls and better timing. So I think this is going to be a game where it's like, look, you got to set up those explosives in some way, but you got to still take advantage when you get those explosives. So it's going to be a good week to see what this offense really has. It's pretty much fully healthy. I mean, aside from Will Fries at right guard, this is a very healthy offense right now. It's time to take advantage and really get some points on the board and just figure out who you are on that side of the ball. I know Richardson's going to have his struggles every week, and it's not always going to be this perfectly linear process with him, but it's time to figure out like what this offense is going to be, because at the midway point, you should really know what direction your team is going in. And I think we know this is a competitive football team on both sides of the ball, but I don't think we know exactly what they are identity-wise on either side right now. So big game against Houston. It's time to figure out who you want to be on offense. And are you going to be this very volatile, explosive-seeking offense, or can you build some efficiency for your young quarterback to take advantage of the explosives after that?
Yeah, we are going to see for sure. Maybe they'll be able to, put up another 27 plus points or not. We'll see. But coming up, we're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball because obviously that one's not as easy to get, kind of riled up about. But there's some things there they can maybe do. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, which includes California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Prize Picks is also the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, that means that Prize Picks is going to keep your lineup alive. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus because it's guaranteed. Just download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, and now another topic near and dear to my heart. Pre-alcohol probiotic drink by Zbiotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. I am not immune to that. I am getting older. It is starting to have more and more side effects on me, and I feel like I am dying or am just a shriveled up worm on the sidewalk almost after having a few beers. So this comes in very, very clutch. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct. Just remember to make sure that Zbiotics is your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and then you'll feel your best tomorrow. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. And for the best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly, always, right? Pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. We know all the tips and tricks. They don't always work, but Zbiotics will send you over the winning way. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Because I don't know if any of you have ever tried to take care of and chase around a toddler while you're hungover. 0 out of 10 stars. Do not recommend. So go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnNFL at checkout. Zbiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. All right, Zach, so you and I were kind of talking off air about this one, about the defensive side of the ball. The Colts defense hasn't really been taking the ball away from Houston's offense, but they get to CJ a lot on sacks. The first game last year, they had 7 sacks. In their first game this year, they had 4. I think they had a couple in week 18. So they get after him. And we've seen, CJ hasn't really had a weak game against the Colts, but when he does in the NFL have a weak game, it's, getting that constant pressure at him. And, if DeForest Buckner is able to play, that obviously would be huge. He himself provides an interior pass rush. His teammates who line up next to him, Latu is a big beneficiary of that. Buckner helps take that attention away and allows Latu, more one-on-one situations. So let's talk about Buckner's status first, just to get that in there. So he's listed as questionable, but he is still on IR. They opened up his practice window. They can designate him to return and then remove him off the list. He's still on there, so they can't, unless they were going to make that transaction, they can't say he's ready to go yet. So That's something we can wait to see this weekend. Me just reading the tea leaves from this week, especially today, I think he's going to play. Again, that's not inside information. That's just me, from the facility, putting 2 and 2 together today. So he technically didn't practice today, but he was out there kind of moseying around, talking to guys. He even stretched out there with everybody, which led me to think he was practicing. But then Shane said afterward, after the open media portion, we only get to see like the first 20 minutes or so practice, that Buck did not practice. But then Shane categorized it as a rest day. And that was even on the injury report as well. If you're aiming for Buckner to not really start playing until next week, you probably practice him on Friday. You don't give him a rest day. A rest day is for him about to be playing that week. So just reading between the lines, I think he's going.
Yeah, and what we've seen with the Colts this year is that Thursday practice is the most important one when it comes to injured players, like what we've seen with Josh Downs and Michael Pittman Jr. The past couple of weeks. Braden Smith is they will do full practice on Thursday, rest on Friday and not practice, and then they'll be good to go on Sunday. So the second I saw Buckner out there for that Thursday practice in full, it was kind of a done deal in my head that he was going to be back. But let's talk about this Colts defense against the Houston Texans this week, because it's kind of fascinating thinking about this Colts defense this year. We're coming into the year, we said, hey, this front seven needs to be dominant for the Colts to be an average defense. Like, front seven needs to just dominate football games, because that back half, that back four, five, whatever it's going to be, is not going to be good enough to win games for you. You know, they have a lot of inexperience back there, a lot of young guys that you're relying on in the front sevens, where the Colts put a lot of their money and a lot of their resources. And then after the first couple weeks, it became evident that that front seven was not going to be good enough to do that for the Colts. Mm-hmm. And we had that little lull there where it was like, this might be the worst defense in football. And then what we've seen these last 3 weeks or so, these last couple weeks, is the secondary's really stepped up. From Jalen Jones' big game against Chicago, from Samuel Womack being shut down Sam back there, Kenny Moore coming back this past week and just taking away everything the Dolphins wanted to do. And then Nick Cross being one of the biggest answers in run defense for the Colts. Like, this secondary has kind of helped the Colts propel into, again, statistically, this is around an average to below average defense right now. And it's being led by the secondary right now, not really the front seven. I think this game, though, will come down to that front seven again. Like, again, the secondary's been playing well, and I expect that to continue, especially without the top 5 receiver that is Nico Collins out there to just dominate you, because Nico Collins is that good. But I think this is a game where your front seven really needs to show up, because in week 1, the Colts were just destroyed on the ground game by this Texan rushing attack. Joe Mixon is back and healthy for this one. He's had over 100 yards in every game he's finished this season, which started in that week 1 game against the Indianapolis Colts. So they really need to contain him. And then again, like you mentioned, CJ Stroud has been sacked a lot in recent weeks. They've had a lot of issues with picking up stunts and picking up twist. So really the key to this game goes back to what we would have said going into week 1, where it's like, stop the ground game and get pressure on CJ Stroud on third down. Like, it really doesn't come down to this secondary, despite how well the secondary has played this season. Like, hats off to every player in the secondary for overperforming compared to all of our expectations coming into the year. But I'm cool with them just being what we expected at this point, because the front seven really needs this big week. Getting back to DeForest Buckner is massive. Having a healthy Kwity Paye, healthy Laiatu Latu, healthy Dayo Adangbo, like, getting all those guys out there is big. And they need to get pressure on CJ Stroud. We haven't seen much pressure from the Colts defensive line since Buckner left the lineup, essentially. Like, it's kind of been really hit or miss. So this is the game where they need to come alive. It's against an offensive line that's really struggling right now, that's not really picking up many stunts and twists. And CJ Stroud's been under quite a bit of duress right now. So this defensive line needs to get after it for the Colts to win this game, because if they get blown off the ball like they did in week 1, regardless of if Nico Collins is playing or not, which he's not, I'm just saying, like, even if he were playing or not, like, it wouldn't matter, because if you're getting blown off the line, you're not going to win this game. So the Colts defensive line has a big task in front of them. They need to perform like we expected them to perform in the offseason. And with everyone healthy right now, there's really no excuse. Like, this is a game they need to come out and look like what the Colts expected them to look like in the offseason, or they simply won't win this game.
Yeah, I think week 1 was something that really should have taught the Colts a lesson. Now, obviously, they didn't really learn it until the next week against Green Bay.
Right.
But, Gus Bradley and Charlie Partridge, acknowledged and mentioned that they were going to defend the run in week 1 on their way to CJ Stroud. Their entire game plan was about CJ Stroud. They didn't expect Joe Mixon to be turning back the clocks. Now, like you mentioned, Mixon is doing it against everybody, so which is probably a bit more concerning, because it's legit. It wasn't just that you couldn't handle him in week 1. So I think I think game plan wise, it's gonna have to be more reminiscent of what they've done these last several weeks. Like, I think they're just gonna have to, they're going to have to defend CJ Stroud like they have a lot of these guys. Like, they're going to have to allocate resources to stopping the run because, I mean, CJ Stroud is still that dude, but he does not have Nico Collins in this one. And that's just been some sort of, like, they can't figure that out whatsoever. But if Joe Mixon runs wild on you, it's just going to be dang near impossible to win. We've talked about it before. If you can't stop the run, it makes things so much worse everywhere else. So they're going to have to, I don't want to say Joe Mixon needs to be the main focus of their defense necessarily, but defending him can't be a byproduct of the entire defensive plan solely focused on CJ Stroud.
Yeah, and one thing I will say really quick before we get to our final segment is Gus Bradley has shown this year in matchups where he's scared of the deep pass, he will play a lot of too high. This past week against Miami Dolphins, they were playing a lot of too high, and that's kind of why the Dolphins were able to run the ball a little bit more, is because Nick Cross was off the line of scrimmage, scared of that Tyreek Hill speed. Now, in their games where they're not scared of that deep ball, they like to bring Cross into the box, they like to go more heavy in the box, more base defense, and we've seen that work to some degrees of success against other teams. I'm curious if the Colts look at this matchup without Nico Collins and say, look, CJ Stroud scares us. Like, don't get me wrong, but the deep ball doesn't really scare us. So we're going to run more cover 3 than we ran all year in this matchup because the Texans are going to be more of this short to intermediate passing game without Nico Collins rather than the big explosive over the top game that Stroud has been the last 2 years with Collins. So I think that'll be a big aspect of it because Gus Bradley's not even top 10. I think he's barely top 10 in cover 3 usage this year. The Colts are running a lot of cover 2, a lot of Tampa 2 type stuff. And for the most part, it's limited passing offenses, but I wonder if they do go back to their roots a little bit more with cover 3 this week because Stroud doesn't have that vertical passing option that is Nico Collins, like the best vertical receiver in football. Like,
which is odd because that's what Tank Dell is. It just hasn't been there yet this year for the most part.
Yeah, but again, Nico Collins opens that up because he's so dominant vertically down the field. So it does kind of limit their offense quite a bit. It's like if the Colts were missing both Pittman and Pierce. That's what Nico Collins is. So it's a big loss for them. It really is a big loss.
Yeah. All right, guys, coming up, we're going to give you our official guesses at this thing, who's going to win. Plus, we take on your bold predictions that you guys sent in to us today. NFL fans, you can spark the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. All right, so when I looked at this before the game, FanDuel had the Texans still at 4.5-point favorites, which is one of the bigger, the bigger advantages I've seen in a Colts matchup this season so far. I remind you, CJ Stroud is 2-1 against the Colts. The biggest point differential in any of those 3 matchups was an 11-point Colts win last year. Otherwise, the Texans won by 4 in Week 18, and that was the game that the Colts kind of beat themselves with that failed 4th down. So 2-point loss in Week 1. So I don't know. I don't necessarily buy it. So you guys let FanDuel know what you think by throwing your money in there at FanDuel.com. All right, guys. So we put out the bat signal once again this week for your guys' bold predictions and hot takes for this matchup. We're going to go ahead and go to the Insider program first. So this one says the Colts get revenge and win 27-21. Dominant running game with a few big plays. They limit Joe Mixon to less than 100 yards. Let's see. I don't know who that means.
That might be the biggest part of it right there is the Joe Mixon limited to 100 yards.
Honestly, next week people will be debating whether or not the Colts are the worst 5-3 team in recent memory, but we won't care.
Oh, I'll take that, baby. I will take that 100%.
Yeah, I like that one.
That's a funny one. I like that one too.
I could see them holding Mixon to below 100 yards just because it bit them so hard in Week 1 that it'll be in everyone's mind to do that.
I don't know, man. Outside the Chicago game, the Colts, even when they've committed resources stopping the run, I think the Chicago game and the Pittsburgh game a little bit because Justin Fields ran all over them in that game, but they did limit the run game a little bit in that game. But I don't know. I don't know if they have the facilities for that, man. I don't know.
Now, we mentioned they haven't really been getting turnovers against DJ Stroud. This one says 2 interceptions, one by Womack and one by Jalen Jones off of CJ Stroud. I know you really like that one, especially the Womack one.
I will take an interception on CJ Stroud. We have 0 against this guy in 3 matchups so far. Last time they took 2 away from the Colts, one for some dumb heel rule that I didn't even know existed, and then the other one for a holding in the end zone or something on Jalen Jones. Like, let's get a pick on CJ Stroud this time, guys.
Yeah, they should have legitimately had at least one of those. And then the last one from the Insider program, and this is from our guy Kenny. With DeForest Buckner back, the Colts topped their Week 1 4-sack performance with some extra spice with pressure from the middle back with Buckner. Latu gets 2 sacks in this one.
Okay. I could see that one. Again, the Texans' offensive line has struggled. And honestly, if what Kenny's saying here, if the Colts do that, I think they win this game. They need to get sacks in this game. Obviously, what they do on offense is important too, but need pressure on Stroud if you have any chance of winning this game.
Yeah, I definitely think Buckner opens up things for Latu so much. And I mean, if he plays, I gotta imagine he's on a pitch count still. Like, they may not throw him out there for 50 snaps, whatever. But I mean, those two together side by side look pretty good during the summer. So, you have any from Twitter that really caught your eye?
Let's see. We got one from Colts fan Cole that says Anthony Richardson will have the most fantasy football points in the entire NFL this week. Fun fact, in my family league, because my team is so loaded, I've been starting Richardson in my family league the last couple of weeks because somebody dropped him, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to be a homer and start him. So I've been starting him. Like, he got me like 8 points last week, but I still scored like 140. So it's like, I can feel good still winning with my boy here, and I need him to just pick up the pace so I can break some league records. And so hopefully that one comes true this week. And obviously for the Colts as well, that would just be fantastic there.
Well, he was, I don't have it right in front of me, but he was one of the top 5 QBs in fantasy scoring in Week 1.
Yeah.
Because he had a good performance on the ground as well, and obviously had those big plays to Alec Pierce. So that, I mean, there's a track record there for that in this opponent.
Yeah, we got a couple other good ones here. Jonathan Taylor, 2 touchdowns and 125 scrimmage yards. I don't think that's super bold, but I do like it just because
that used to be nothing for him against Houston. He didn't have a good performance against them in Week 1, but like, he has had some enormous performances against them before.
Yep. We got more on Anthony Richardson here, but my personal favorite one right here, Taven Bryan, career day, 3+ sacks and 3+ tackles for a loss. Now, I don't know if we're double counting those 3. So I don't know if those are the same 3 plays or if that's 6 total impact plays from Taven Bryan. That might be like 6 more than his entire career up to this point, but I will gladly take that from Quaglone, I think is his name here on Twitter. So yeah, we got some fun ones there on Twitter. I think it should be a good game though. Like, I really think this Colts team has a good puncher's chance, like a better chance than what Vegas is saying and what a lot of analysts are saying. Like, what was it NFL Network there? It was like all like 8 of their analysts picked the Texans in this game. And it's like,
weird.
You would think this is an undefeated team versus a no-win team with all of them picking one team. This is
a 2-point game in Week 1.
Yeah. And this is a 5-2 team versus a 4-3 team, you know? And one thing I want to throw out there, like, this isn't a bold prediction, but I think it's something really important to mention because we talked about it a couple times in this episode. But the NFL right now is a superstar-driven league. Yes, it's a quarterback-driven league too, and CJ Stroud is ahead of Anthony Richardson right now in terms of quarterback play, so I get that. But it is also a superstar-driven league. The Colts have all 2 to 3 of their superstars playing in this game, most likely. They'll have DeForest Buckner back, Jonathan Taylor back, and then Quentin Nelson's been playing at his superstar level. You look at the Texans right now, Tunsil has struggled quite a bit this season, especially when it comes to penalties and just issues he's had. Nico Collins, a true bona fide superstar, is not playing in this game. And honestly, for my money, like, I'm not going to say Azeez Al-Shaair is superstar level, but he's a very good player, and he's not playing in this game.
He matches up well with the Colts.
Right. So I do think that is an element of this that's not getting enough conversation, is the Texans are missing some really important players. I mean, the last 2 weeks, Stroud has had like 52 pass attempts for only like 260 yards without Nico Collins. Like, I know that he could still go off this week, Stroud, but it's a big deal not having your superstar playmaker on offense in Nico Collins. He is a fantastic wide receiver. I know I've said that 20 times on this episode alone, but I truly believe he's like one of the best players in football. So not having that, like, I do think this is a huge deal in this game. I don't know if it's enough for the Colts to get the win, but I do think this is going to be a closer game than what most people are saying. And again, I'm not a big gambler or anything like that, but 4.5 does feel a little bit much in this game. I would probably put more like a 3-point spread on this, or a 2.5-point spread.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually, I want to mention one more thing on that. So I think Anthony's legs will be a big difference in this one. He does have a track record of running the ball well against Houston. He obviously had the big game that led to the concussion last year. But he had 56 yards and a 9.3 yards per carry against them in week 1 with a touchdown. Had a 19-yard run in that one. So if he's not as sharp and crisp passing the ball, because I think Houston is like second in YPA allowed, which is wild considering week 1. But they've really buttoned up there. But they're really banged up. Even some of the guys that'll be in there are just banged up. And so I do think the Colts are going to win this one, a close one. I have it like 23-21.
Okay.
It doesn't feel hot takey to me. Like, sure, the Texans should be, in general, the umbrella statement is they should be favored, but like, I just think the Colts, as long as they don't keep shooting themselves in the foot, like there's no reason they shouldn't be able to win.
Yeah. Now, for my prediction, again, I want to remind you guys, the Colts this season are 1-3 when I've picked them, or 1-2, I think, when I've picked them this year. I think it's 1-2, and they're 3-1 when I've picked against them. So I'm doing this for you guys. Okay. I'm doing this for you guys. I'm doing this for the Colts. The Colts like to prove me wrong. So I am going with the Texans in this game, 26-24 Texans. But again, I'm doing this for you guys. I'm doing this for you. This is not me. This is me trying to cheat the football gods is what I'm trying to do. But let us know your prediction here in the comment section, guys. And let us know who goes off in this game. What are your bold takes for Colts Texans? Again, divisional lead is on the line. The Colts have a massive, massive game in front of them. And we want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today. Now, if your second listen, go find the new Locked On NFL now with 2 shows every single day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube, where we list your podcast. And if you guys want to become part of the Locked On Colts Insider Program and get priority on these bold prediction shows and bold statement shows and stuff like that, follow the link in our show notes. And if you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. We're also on TikTok and Instagram. Give us a follow over there, and also subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings and views, and we'll catch you guys back here Sunday after the game.